Kristin Messerli, and I am so excited to be interviewing you, Lizzie Garner, EVP of Guaranteed Rate. And you do a ton of things at Guaranteed Rate, but one of the areas that I interacted with you is in growing when you were growing the Grow organization at Guaranteed Rate. And I know you also do a lot in training and internal communication. But thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Excited to get to see what we can uncover today.
Yeah, so my first question for you, and I'm sure that you can think of many answers to this, but what is one example of when you were particularly audacious in your career? So a time that you really stepped out or took a leap of faith.
Oh, and it's really, you're exactly right. There are probably a few times, and most recently I think about moving everyone home for COVID as we found ourselves like out of my complete comfort zone and just saying, we're making the call and everyone's going to work from home, not knowing that 2 weeks would turn into what will seem like 2 years at some point. But I think of a sort of a larger one that feels like my move from Chase or JP Morgan Chase or Bank One, the kind of comfort of the bank and the financial services that had really brought me into the business, and the move to go to an independent mortgage banker. It was always from the Chase side, it seemed really risky and it seemed very different than where I'd come from, how I'd grown up. And I always loved working at Chase. And so to make that jump to what I thought was an independent mortgage banker had all the excitement of being able to create my own content and create my own communication. And Chase had really had it all sort of worked out, and getting that blank slate to be able to start to create those departments at Guaranteed Rate was exciting, but also terrifying. What if I didn't have the right things to say? What if I didn't create the right communication strategy or training strategy? So I think for me, even within financial services, I went from what felt like the comfort of the bank, the big bank, to Guaranteed Rate independent mortgage banker at that time, doing just under 14 billion a year in closed business. Felt like, oh my gosh, what will I do? How will it work? And it certainly has paid off for me now 9 years later, but it was a big, scary move.
When you wear so many hats in the organization, so I mean, how have you've learned to kind of take something, build it, and then set it, let it grow. But is that something that you feel like you have really grown into in the organization, or is that something that you like a skill set you've always had?
I think that it was really developed at Guaranteed Rate, and truly it was developed out of necessity. It's easy to think about the growth that we've had and how I couldn't possibly hold on to everything. And I can think of those days where I started to feel further from things. I remember the first time I heard a President's Club producer's name who I didn't know and recognize immediately. And I immediately was consumed with all this like self-doubt and sick stomach of like, what other things couldn't I know? How do I not know the name of every President's Club producer? That was a normal feel for us. We interacted often. And I remembered that moment as pivotally thinking, ooh, this has gotten beyond what I can sort of manage on my own. And truly, I was never managing it on my own, but I did have to get substantially better. I credit Liz Wiseman as one of the writers of the book Multipliers, where you had to sort of look at your style and how much could you control and do every day, but how much more could you do if you could create more of you and transfer that skill set. So it's certainly something that I live by. And I always was surrounded by great people who were committed and willing to learn and willing to try new things. But it was definitely put to the test when you couldn't actually physically or mentally hold on to all of the growth that was happening. So it's been an exciting ride. And I still think of her in that book often as I think of what have we launched and what's the sort of go forward plan? How can someone else continue to maintain this and own it? And the team has continued to build. It used to have a couple of pillars. It was a small house. Now as 4, 6 pillars, it's continued to be able to get larger. So
that's amazing. thinking about how I was telling you, I think that I felt at beyond capacity. I mean, I'm doing so much, but then I think, how do I keep growing? But you have to let go of control and empower other people to continue to grow those things. So,
and it's so exciting when they end up better than you even imagined. I'll tell you that the payoff for me when I think about if I had owned that and the way that I owned it to the end, it would have never been as great as the new ideas and the mix of kind of old school discipline and what we learned and what we knew about the industry and what their appetite was mixed with the new ambition of what people could see and make of it. Those things ended up substantially better. Even it wasn't just a manageable technique. It was, this is how we will continue to get better. And then I will be able to realize my plot to take over the world can then do it all.
Speaking of, you guys have exponentially grown since I met you a couple of years ago. And it seems like so much is going on in your organization. But can you describe it doesn't have to be recent or it could be a long time ago, but a pivotal moment in your career when you decided, I'm going to change the way that I'm doing things here?
I really think that pivotal change and management style for me became the idea that I couldn't own it all. I couldn't run all of it myself. I couldn't be involved and actually I couldn't take the next step or even take on the next challenge or the next exciting piece of growth or the next acquisition opportunity until I could build a team that could maintain what we needed to still do, right? Because you still have to keep the lights on. You have to continue to drive revenue so that you can capitalize on that next acquisition. That stuff can't stop while you're taking on the new challenge. And again, I think it was that multipliers kind of book and that uneasiness of feeling like I can't hold all this anymore, and realizing it wasn't a deficit. It was actually a strength. It was something I could turn into creating our next best leaders. I didn't get here alone. Someone grabbed my arm and pulled me up here and taught me things. And every day we still find ourselves doing things we hadn't done previously. You and I had an opportunity to talk about even learning to do the podcast or learning to make a plan to send everyone home for COVID, those weren't things I had any training in, but you could continue to take that uneasiness and figure it out and work and get to a really great solution. And I think still from that moment, I think about when it got too big, when it got larger than I could keep my eyes on every day. How does that continue? How do we continue to do that? We keep building all those pillars to be able to keep it up. So I think for me that I have to think about it often. That's not done, right? That will continue to be who's the next, where else could we use additional help? I think about our team often and what's a superpower we don't have? What if we had someone who knew this? What if we could bring someone's strength to do that? And it's been really fun to get to see our team grow with additional insights, strengths, experience. It's been busy. It's been busy, but fulfilling to see it continue to keep getting legs.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the things that I want to bring through this podcast or through this interview is just encouraging people to think outside the box and think about, what are those missing components here, how we haven't done things a certain way, but let's challenge that idea. So what's one way that you have challenged the status quo in our industry or in your career?
Sure. I think the biggest one that comes to mind, and there could have been other, but the biggest that come to mind for me was our GROW organization, our guaranteed rate organization of women, which the acronym very, clearly and quickly spelled GROW, but it was so great to see it start. Even Kristin, you were our very first speaker. We had this idea that we'd bring in experts and they would teach us things. And I think that first session that we ran had a couple hundred people or 150 people. And you brought information and it was so new for us because we weren't creating a safe space for women in the industry to talk about either what their challenges were, what their successes were, or where and how could we help continue to add women to the industry. We looked at the industry and went, man, this is a way for so many of us to make a great living without being Harvard educated like engineers. We could all still really create great lives for ourselves. With this flexible schedule, we should be attracting more women into the business. This allows so much of what women were telling us they wanted in a career, but we still didn't have people lining up to say like, I want to be a mortgage banker when I grow up, please let me. But for all of us who had a hand into this business, it was about how could we create more of that? What could we do to ensure that women were able to have this place to exchange ideas and bounce things off of each other and also make the move. A big piece of what I do at Guaranteed Rate, the internal communication and the training, but it also became employee transitions and onboarding. And it became, how do we make this a place where you would want to work, but even more importantly, that you want to stay in work and that you want to continue to do more business here and that you feel connected to the organization. And I think the idea that we could attack what was unconscious, I don't think that the mortgage business was like declared to be men only or mostly men, and we're going to, create a big wall. It was done unconsciously, but what could we do thoughtfully and consciously to get in front of that sort of bias and say, we'll create and provide even more opportunity for women to grow within the organization, find a new sales assistant who's your next emerging, great, amazing originator who can help put families in homes. And I think just creating that idea, I then was able to meet so many other women who were also challenging the status quo within the industry and find some additional network and sharing between. So I think that the organization of Grow itself was a big one for us.
Now, before we started recording, you mentioned that on your last call, you had over 1,000 attendees, right?
Just at 1,000, yeah. So I was thinking, Kristin, I should probably have done the math, but I think yours was about 2 years ago. And so we've done one webinar a month for the past 2 years. And I think yours was a couple of hundred. And the one I just hosted a couple of days ago was just under 1,000. And so the idea that people are in this business, as busy as everyone is, investing an hour in themselves to learn about financial planning, we've done so many amazing topics, some of which were more mortgage focused and some were professional and personal development focused. And they've been just really received well in an industry where I don't know that we always put a lot of time and effort and energy into education other than continuing education. It's not that kind. It's the stuff that you really want to take in and makes you kind of a whole person better. And so we've been thrilled with the turnout.
Yeah, that's really amazing. You had mentioned that over the last year, people were really using it as a social connection. And that's something that I think is really interesting in today's time, that, people would be able to build that kind of connection that you didn't really have before that, right? Yeah, I mean, it's so great that the organization itself, both Guaranteed Rate and Grow within it, have sort of evolved with the times. We did the webinar and you came in and talked to us about women influencing decisions and home purchases and ensuring that we were really looking at this as a business opportunity as well. So it's interesting because we really started it as women as originators want the same things that male originators want, which are amazing products and low prices and great service for clients. We want all these same kind of things. But what it really grew into, especially over the last year, was what we called our better together. People were reaching out and saying, sure, you can talk to me about appraisal things or this or how to grow a renovation business. But what I'd really like to do is like get together and have a glass of wine and read a book and catch up about how my family's making me crazy. So we started calling them Better Together events. And we've hosted, I think, 12 of those over the pandemic that we did things like how to host a virtual event. How do you get on and host something where you're interacting with people in a whole new way when so many of our originators, and certainly most of us, learned all of our sales and connection styles in person, right? We were handshakers and out kind of meeting at events and being social. People do business with people they like. And to see the organization start to support not just originators, which was our original focus, but the women in our organizations as a whole, to say, this is just a place where I can also talk to others about the fact that during the pandemic, we're so busy and it's so different than my friends are maybe experiencing or my family's experiencing. And these are like people in our industry who understand the waves and the cycles and
are spending a ton of time during the pandemic helping people get into new homes and navigating the new regulatory or guideline places. I can complain about it and chat about it and work through it and have a sense of community versus what was really our initial focus was like education and growing business and giving you additional tools. People were using it in a whole new way, and we've been thrilled to just move along the journey with them.
Yeah, that's incredible. Well, I love what you guys are doing. I know we're at time, but my last quick question for you is just how have you, has there been a time when you've made a mindset shift and I feel like you've been talking about that this whole time, the ways that you've changed your mind about things, but I would love for people to hear how there's been a time in your career or in your life when you've kind of challenged the status quo within yourself.
Yeah, I will say that the one kind of place I think about most often is when I no longer could get my to-do list done in a day, like when every day's to-do list couldn't get done anymore. And I didn't always have the satisfaction of crossing everything off or starting a new list. My world and my influence, my scope had gotten larger than I could kind of manage on a task list. I remember doing some kind of reading and thinking through and trying to talk to others. And I decided that my sort of motto would be, whatever is my highest and best use for the time is what I'm going to do. So there are times my highest and best use is to sit on the couch and catch up on television and not think about anything other than the crazy television that I choose to entertain myself with. But there are other times where my highest and best use is to be investing in my people. So again, they can multiply their efforts, or my highest and best use is to be a mom. And it means I am not looking at work stuff and I'm not thinking about that. But if whatever I was doing at the time was my highest and best use, my traction would be, those were the things I had to do. And so I still think every one of us is, and I'm assuming a lot of industries think this way, but I think all of us mortgage people especially would say, you can try to plan your day, but it'll take you where it takes you. And when the day sort of spits me out from whatever it took me on for the day, I love that I always feel centered to however I spent my day, as long as it was my highest and best use of what I needed to get done for that day, if that I wanted to do, that I needed to work on, those feel like, for me at least, again, mentally, I kind of go back to that place of, if it was my highest and best use to watch TV for 2 hours, then that's what I did. And it's completely fine, because without it, I wouldn't have been productive doing something else, or I get involved in a new project. And that was my highest and best use, to understand it, to figure out what we're going to do with it, and then work with people to figure out how they're going to help kind of carry it on. So I think that's a common theme in my internal dialogue, is like, what is my highest and best use right now? And that's the best I can do.
Definitely going to take that on. I do feel overwhelmed all the time by the to-do list, and, constantly I'm thinking like, I'm forcing myself to get stuff done. But you're right. If I had just relaxed for a moment or something, I would have gotten the other stuff done faster, or just taking care of my health, which is important, So I love that motto. Yeah. But thank you so much, Lizzie, for taking the time today. It's so great catching up with you, and I'm excited to share this with everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.